There are tens of thousands of videos of Epstein with children or child porn.
As there are a wave of people online continuing to call on the government to release the rest of the information they have about Jeffrey Epstein, we are learning a bit more about what exactly agents might be having to slog through. But this also comes as authorities announce a sweeping child predator bust. We're getting into all of it right now. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, this is another Law&Crime legal alert. So lawsuits allege that antacid use has been linked to increases in stomach cancer and gastric cancer. If you or a loved one were diagnosed with stomach cancer or gastric cancer after using an antacid, you may qualify for compensation. And one of our legal sponsors is partnering with the Driscoll firm. This is a national firm helping those injured to ensure their claims are thoroughly presented. Visit antacidclaims.com/sidebar or scan the QR code on screen to answer less than 10 questions and check your eligibility to file a claim. It has been weeks since U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi announced the release of FBI documents related to the investigation into infamous pedophile and disgraced billionaire Jeffrey Epstein, who, as we know, died in a New York jail cell while awaiting his trial on sex trafficking charges. And since then, there has been this growing call for federal authorities to release everything, to release previously top secret details about what the FBI uncovered regarding Epstein. Now, much of what we do know about Epstein's alleged trafficking enterprise was learned from court documents that were related to criminal and civil proceedings against Epstein's madam and one-time girlfriend Ghislaine Maxwell. She was convicted of sex trafficking, currently locked up in prison in Florida. Pretty much all the information that Bondi released to the public back in February was already known. It wasn't a bombshell. These were things like flight logs and Epstein's contact book, which honestly infuriated a lot of people. It infuriated particularly a lot on the right, like right-wing influencers like Laura Loomer, Florida Representative Anna Paulina Luna. They accused the AG of essentially lying to the American people and even said she should resign. So what happens? May 6th. Conservative commentator Benny Johnson uploaded an episode of his podcast called The Benny Show, where Representative James Comer, chairman of the House Oversight Committee, spoke about this delay. And he said in part, quote, "I don't think the Department of Justice has them, or at least the Attorney General does not have them, or she would have turned them over." Now, Congressman Comer said something very similar a few weeks ago when speaking with Sharyl Attkisson for the new show Full Measure. He said at the time, "I hope they're not shredding documents." So that was apparently in reference to a theory that the Biden administration was possibly destroying evidence before the transition in January. And he also commented, "Was our government involved in this? Were they potentially blackmailing some of the most influential people in the United States or in the world? And if that was the case, I find it hard to believe that any type of evidence of that would still be in existence." So one day after the clip from The Benny Show aired, Attorney General Pam Bondi was answering questions from a gaggle of reporters when one asked about Comer's comments.
James Comer said yesterday that all the Epstein files are missing. Can you confirm that they still haven't heard from you?
No, the FBI, they're reviewing, there are tens of thousands of videos of Epstein with children or child porn. And there are hundreds of victims. And no one victim will ever get released. It's just the volume, and that's what they're going through right now. The FBI is diligently going through that. I haven't seen that statement, but I'll call him later and find out.
Hundreds of victims, thousands of videos. Imagine that. Now, is it true? Maybe, maybe not. Let's talk about it. So to talk about this, I want to bring in Jeremy Eldridge, a criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor, has experience in these kinds of child pornography cases. Jeremy, so good to see you. Thanks for taking the time. What do you make of this response from AG Bondi?
It's wildly unsurprising. Not only has the Republican Party consistently touted the same theme of prosecuting sex offenders and uncovering the Epstein files, there's been this long push for the public to gain awareness about what was actually going on the island, whether there were people that should have been prosecuted that weren't, and frankly, where there are elected officials and or famous people, and the public has a vested interest in finding out who they are, what they did, and whether there's any criminal liability.
You got to walk me through what they're looking at. So if you take her word as true, and you're looking at maybe videos upon videos upon videos of, purported underage victims being abused, you have a team that has to go through all that. And what do? They redact it Do they redact the time codes? Is there anything of that video that's actually going to be able to be released? Because, you know, AG Bondi made it clear she doesn't want the victims to be identified, and I don't blame her. That's the right way to go about this. But how does the actual review and redaction process work?
Well, let's take the last question first, which is whether this material, if uncovered, makes its way into the public sphere. And the answer is likely no. There are protections afforded to the victims of crime like this, regardless of whether this activity occurred 10 or 20 years ago, such that if there are videos made of this material, they may be shown in a courtroom as far as a prosecution is concerned, but even then, the public's access to that courtroom may not be unfettered. And so it's unlikely that the material itself will come out. But what they're looking for, which is the bigger question, is there was really no effort to hide the affiliation between Epstein and a lot of these, for instance, former presidents, famous actors. So there was no effort to hide any of that. There were meticulous plane records, as you brought up, and travel documents. But when it comes down to what happened in these rooms, that a lot of people are theorizing occurred as far as the sexual child abuse, which is what it comes down to, taking advantage of minors, that material we may never know unless, number one, it's uncovered. Number two, they can actually prosecute the individuals who committed the conduct. Otherwise, we may never find out.
So what about this? In an effort to be transparent, is it possible they would release a tape that has a blurred out vision, a blurred out face of the alleged minor victim? You have whoever that other person might be, let's say it's Jeffrey Epstein. They take the video of them walking into a room together, cut it, and then the video of them leaving the room or something like that. I have no idea, I'm just saying. Or they provide no video for the public, but they do a document list and a video description for each one of those videos. Is that possible?
I think you're 100% right on the second option, which is more in line what we would call a proffer or an offer of proof, to say, this is the material that was uncovered, this is what we believe that material shows, and then they'll label each victim as, for instance, victim number one or Jane Doe, is they want to protect the innocence or frankly the identity of that individual. What also has to be known for the public is that the reason that child pornography, which is what this would be, can't be released to the public is that the dissemination of such material, frankly, constitutes a secondary crime. So the possession of it by the government in itself obviously isn't a crime because they might be prosecuting that behavior. However, its release into the public could constitute a secondary crime, and that's why you never see it done publicly. But to your point, there's an easy way to disseminate this information, to build public trust in the fact that they're investigating it, if they are, and then to release some of this information publicly without harming victims.
Do you think if there was evidence of something being destroyed or something not being released, we would know that?
That's certainly a possibility. If they obtain an advice, you know, the infamous Hunter Biden's laptop, right? And nothing is available, but you might see that files were deleted, or, you know, you don't know how meticulous some of this organization was. If they were keeping a library of these videos to potentially blackmail or extort an individual in the future, and they had names of videos so you can see the names of the file, but you can't necessarily see the file anymore, that could be something that may constitute evidence, or at least show that there was, in fact, this library of recordings, but they may not be able to cover the videos. But these days, the federal government has shown pretty broad success in being able to recover electronic information that the accused thought was deleted, but in fact was not.
And you heard the theory, right? One of the reasons there's a delay is because, is it possible the U.S. government was using this to blackmail people, right? And, you know, you don't want this to come out, and that's why there's a delay, and the government might have been behind that. You think there's anything to that?
Look, there are never a shortage of conspiracy theories as they surround Epstein. You know, the photographs of him and former presidents, titans of industry, and famous actors certainly help propound these theories. But as far as the United States government engaging in this conduct, it seems a little far-fetched on mine.
Do you think any of the delay has to do with any of potentially high-profile people who are either on these videos, described in these videos, connected to these videos? I know AG Bondi said it has to do with the content of it, right? It has to do with, you know, minors being abused here. But do you think there's something else? Again, one of the theories is it's because who may be on those tapes. That's why you see the delay. And again, this is unverified. We cannot confirm this any which way, but I got to ask you.
No, I think you're right. There is no doubt, although the public may not want to acknowledge it, that there could be a delay because of some of the people associated with this conduct. I mean, even locally, there was a prosecution in Baltimore, Maryland, of a madam. Or you could go to the larger prosecution of Heidi Fleiss in New York. That when the public sees a famous madam prosecuted, the public gains interest. And you start wondering, who are these high-profile clients? Are we going to see them in court? And magically, as in with Heidi Fleiss, we never saw a lot of the famous individuals that were on that list. And yet the public was waiting, was salivating, waiting for that information to be released. So the same thing occurs here. The mystery surrounding these sorts of cases is unlike almost any other type of prosecution because the public wants to know who was there. We've seen pictures of Epstein with several presidents that are still alive. Why don't we know if they were involved in conduct? And so everyone thinks if a famous person was associated with Jeffrey Epstein, then were they engaged in that conduct? Is there proof of it? And if there is, we want to see it. And that's not going to stop.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because when we did the breakdown of the first document release, like even if there's a client log, there's a contact book, it doesn't mean that they're clients. It doesn't mean that they're connected to any purported illegal activity or anything like that. This is a guy who was very well connected and knew a lot of people. Now, obviously, no one wants to be associated with him. It's toxic. But just to make that caveat. And by the way, from a human point of view, I have to say, the agents who are reviewing this material, what a human toll that is. You know, I used to do doc review when I was a practicing lawyer, but it was like litigation. And yeah, it was time consuming going through that, but it was nothing like this. To go through this material, my gosh, I also wonder if one of the delays is we need a break to go through that. We just need a second to compose ourselves. I always wonder that in criminal cases, you know, prosecutors, investigators having to go through this material, they may need a breathing room from it.
I would love to say that whether it's local law enforcement or federal law enforcement that's engaging in this investigation, that there are guardrails put up to essentially prevent a psychological toll from impacting the individual reviewing the footage. But the fact of the matter is there really isn't. What it really comes down to is that a lot of the investigators, and I've handled these cases as a prosecutor, I've handled them as a defense attorney on both the state and federal level. I've had to go into these rooms and review footage on behalf of my clients. And frankly, it's wildly unpleasant and it does take a toll. So a lot of what we're trained to do, whether you're sitting on either side of the table, is to get up and take a break, frankly. Yeah. And that's what's done oftentimes with agents. They rotate them through. That also goes to the agents that are engaged in undercover work that might be online in chat rooms pretending to be young girls trying to see whether adults are going to invite them into sexual activity. It's the same thing, but it certainly takes a psychological toll. I know, for instance, there are federal agencies that offer counseling services. I know they try to rotate people through that division, but a lot of people don't want to do that work. A lot of people, once they have kids, don't want to engage in the prosecution of these crimes or the investigation of them. So it really takes a very special human, and I mean that in a wonderful way, to be involved in these sorts of cases because of the psychological toll. It's unlike any other work that is done in our field.
That's a good point. By the way, we have an update on a lawsuit that was filed against the U.S. government by a group called Judicial Watch related to this. So we talked about this before, but this is that not-for-profit organization, sometimes referred to as a conservative government accountability group. They claim that when they filed Freedom of Information Act requests, FOIA, to get access to details about the Jeffrey Epstein files, they got the runaround from the Department of Justice and the FBI. So they submitted another one, this time concerning the FBI's new director, Kash Patel. And according to their complaint, Judicial Watch was seeking access to all records of communication between Director Patel and any other individual or entity regarding any lists or other records depicting the identities of clients or associates of Jeffrey Epstein. This request includes, but is not limited to, all records related to the department's compilation, distribution, handling, and the potential public release of any such record or the information contained therein. They say the FBI invoked a 10-day extension both times. They never really provided any information after that. By the way, we checked to find out the latest on this, and once again, we are seeing time extension requests from the feds. In a request that was filed with the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, the interim U.S. Attorney for D.C., Edward R. Martin Jr., writes, defendant requests this extension because undersigned was only recently assigned to this case, and his heavy caseload prevents him from preparing and filing a response to the complaint by the current deadline. The U.S. Attorney's Office is receiving thousands of new cases a year, and there is sometimes a delay in case assignments because of the influx of new cases. More recently, the U.S. Attorney's Office has seen an influx in lawsuits seeking temporary restraining orders requiring immediate attention. Undersigned is currently personally handling over 90 cases, of which more than 50 are active, each with its own competing obligations, deadlines, and demands. An extra 28 days would allow him to better understand the allegations in the complaint and draft a more appropriate response. Jeremy, your reaction to that?
As much as the public deserves its transparency when it comes to the filing of a FOIA or Freedom of Information Act request, these requests are often very burdensome to the government insofar as they are hit with thousands of these a day. And when they're sifting through them, each one has to be taken seriously. The documents have to be collected that are associated with the request, and then certain redactions have to be made. Now, an exception to FOIA, which I'm surprised that we haven't heard about as a defense put forth by the government, is the fact that if there's an ongoing investigation, that is actually a defense to not providing these documents. If there's any ongoing investigation and Director Patel is engaged in a conversation regarding it, then his communications should not be turned over.
Does that tell you that going through the redactions and going through the videos and trying to release it to the public, this is more about a political assignment rather than a legal investigation? In other words, they haven't indicated, nothing to indicate that they are actually going to prosecute someone, arrest somebody from the material that they're going through, but rather just provide transparency to the American people. It's like the JFK files, right? Nobody expected a further investigation or anything like that from releasing the JFK files. It was just a matter of transparency. It was a part of the president's political points leading up to the election. So do you think that that indicates to you, because I think you make a good point, if we're not seeing at this point an immediate objection from FOIA from one of those exceptions, and maybe they will, maybe they need more time to respond, but does that signify to you, hey, they're not investigating anybody regarding Epstein?
I think that's certainly possible. I mean, we have seen the government aggressively prosecute these cases previously. There's nothing to say in reality that the federal government shied away from prosecuting these cases. I mean, we saw it in R. Kelly's case when the government actually has videos that show minors engage in sexual conduct with famous people. There have been prosecutions. Obviously, Epstein was prosecuted in Florida even before he was prosecuted federally and took his own life. But here, they could be going down both lanes at the same time, trying to say, well, maybe if we run into something, we'll prosecute it, but if we don't, we're going to release it. But what they're going to be able to release has to be so edited that I don't know whether it will satisfy the public's thirst for information here. But to your point, that could be why they're not fighting the FOIA request.
Yeah, just something to think about, And as you're seeing these extensions and these delays and, what they think is, they're being given the runaround. But there is something else we have to talk about. This is big, okay? So on Wednesday, the same day that Attorney General Pam Bondi made that statement to reporters about there being thousands of child porn videos connected to Jeffrey Epstein, she also gave a short joint press conference alongside FBI Director Patel about the arrest of hundreds of suspects during Operation Restore Justice.
This historic, unprecedented nationwide operation led to the arrest of 205 child sex predators. Unbelievable. In just 5 days. This was an incredible operation done in conjunction with the FBI and our prosecutors. Children and their families now have a chance to heal. These are online predators. Think about this. 115 victims, children. In 5 days, we were able to help. These depraved human beings, if convicted, will face the maximum penalty in prison, some life. We will find you, we will arrest you, and we will charge you. If you are online targeting a child, you will not escape us.
And Bondi also spoke about the way different members of the law enforcement and legal systems that they are impacted by these investigations.
This kind of work takes a toll on the FBI agents and the prosecutors who are doing this every single day. They are working tirelessly online, dealing with the dregs of our society, the worst of the worst, the people that hide behind a computer and target our young children every single day. Our law enforcement, our prosecutors, sit there and deal with this every day to get these monsters off the street. Director Patel and I, almost daily in our meetings, talk about these cases and what it does to our officers and our prosecutors, but also how many lives are being saved and how many children are being helped by this.
She also pleaded with parents to be more involved in their children's online lives.
Parents, you have to know this is so serious. Your child has no right to privacy on the internet. None. You have to monitor what your kids are doing, whether they're playing games on the internet, on social media, any other websites that children, teenagers frequent. An online predator can find them. I always say it's from instant message to instant nightmare. Parents, they're talking to your kids like they're other children, and they're not. They're predators. They pose as children. They get them sometimes to post explicit pictures of themselves after they talk to them. And then in some cases, they even try to blackmail the children. The suicide rate among teens, ages 14 to 17, has increased.
Patel reiterated that the FBI and other agencies like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is an incredible organization, they are working tirelessly to make it harder for alleged child predators to hide.
I also want to just take a moment to emphasize the priority of this Department of Justice and this FBI. Our children. If you harm our children, you will be given no sanctuary. There is no place we will not come to hunt you down. There is no place we will not look for you. And there is no cage we will not put you in should you do harm to our children. The prioritization of this administration and General Bondi has made it abundantly clear to child predators, you will be hunted down and you will be prosecuted. And that is a refreshing thing to hear for the men and women who do this work tirelessly. And it's also an acknowledgement of the safety that we look forward to bringing America. As the Attorney General mentioned, there are a couple of cases worth highlighting. People in places of public trust have violated not only the law, but that public trust, to include teachers, law enforcement personnel, and other professionals that we look to safeguard our children have not only violated the law, but violated the trust. In Minneapolis, defendant Jeremy Francis Plonsky, a Minneapolis state trooper and former Army reservist, was arrested for producing child sexual abuse material while in uniform. Not anymore. In Norfolk, Virginia, defendant Jose Alexis Valdez Sosa, an illegal immigrant from Mexico, again, allegedly arrested for transporting a minor across state lines. No more. Another example, right here in Washington, D.C., in the Metropolitan Police Department, Officer Linwood Barnhill, a former already convicted sex offender, was arrested again for exploiting more victims, more children, while on supervised release. These are just three examples that show you the extent and the depravity of these horrific crimes. And we need to team up together with the American public to find the rest. I want to give a special thanks to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children for the tireless work they do in partnering with us. And again, I want to thank the Department of Justice and all these folks here.
Jeremy, that is a big announcement, a big operation. What is your reaction to it?
It happens every couple years. Usually what's happening is they uncover something on the dark web, a group or a website that is pandering to this activity. And then once they get in, they usually send someone undercover to join the group. They're able to identify some of those individuals, arrest one of them, and then hopefully identify some of the other perpetrators. And that's why we know it's obviously internet-based. But I think it speaks to the level in which a lot of these offenders try to secret this activity. But every year or two, we see the federal government ferret it out. But because it's so available on the dark web, it's so difficult to investigate and prosecute.
Okay, I want to talk about a couple of these cases because it's pretty shocking to the conscious, to say the least. So Patel mentioned that it involved members or former members of law enforcement. So the first is Jeremy Plonsky, 29-year-old Minnesota state trooper, faces both federal and state charges for honestly some of the most heinous crimes you can imagine, including sexually assaulting an infant, okay? That's what we're talking about. According to a criminal complaint, federal agents were investigating child sex abuse material, it's also known as CSAM, when they found multiple videos, apparently, of Plonsky allegedly assaulting this baby. Agents say his face was clearly visible. And when confronted with that during an interview, Plonsky allegedly told the agents that he was in some sort of dominant, submissive relationship with a person he met online, and that person had directed him to commit the abuse. It's unclear Plonsky's connection to this baby, but Jeremy, aside from how disgusting that is and how, these allegations couldn't be even more wrong, what kind of excuse is that? What kind of defense is that?
Absolutely not a defense. Duress, which is probably the defense that he is referring to, would not apply to a case like this. And so unless somebody had a gun to your head and was threatening death, even then, that's the extreme version of this defense. But duress is not going to be applicable here. And what I think it shows the public is that regardless of what your employment is, that holds no significance as far as what activity you're engaged in. And oftentimes it is an individual like that, a police officer or a teacher, someone who has the public trust, who is engaged in this activity. I've represented school teachers. I've prosecuted school teachers and police officers for this sort of conduct. And so the public's interest in it is always very high because of this betrayal, this very public betrayal that you were watching our kids, you were safeguarding our community. And that's why it's always a surprise, but frankly, it shouldn't be.
It's frightening. It is frightening. You're 100% right. You have no idea, just assuming a member of law enforcement would not engage in this behavior, or allegedly engage in this behavior. And what he's facing, such serious charges. So at the federal level, producing child pornography, at least 15 years in prison. And by the way, he's also charged at the state level. One count of first-degree criminal sexual conduct of a person under the age of 14. Minnesota State Patrol leaders, they told multiple media outlets that an internal investigation is underway. Plonsky suspended in the meantime. He's been with the troopers since 2022, the same year, by the way, he's accused of making these videos. But Patel also spoke about somebody else, Linwood Barnhill, a former Metropolitan Police officer in D.C., 59 years old, convicted sex offender, by the way. He was out of prison on supervised release when he allegedly exploited more victims, including children. The Department of Justice officials say the alleged offenses occurred between April 2024 and April 2025. He's facing multiple new charges, including sex trafficking of children and transportation with intent to engage in criminal sexual activity. The DOJ says he was recruiting minors to perform sex acts for money, that he was going to profit off of this. And that is similar to the situation that led to his arrest back in 2013, when Barnhill was a Metro police officer. A missing 16-year-old girl was found in his home. She told law enforcement that he took photos of her, both clothed and unclothed, and planned to send them to men to arrange so-called dates. She said Barnhill told her that she would get paid $80 per date, but that she would have to give him $20 of that. So you're basically looking at a prostitution scheme here. And he resigned from the police department, pleaded guilty to 2 counts of pandering a minor and 1 count of possession of child pornography. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison, followed by 10 years of supervised release. But during that time, he was allegedly engaging in the same behavior. Jeremy, we talk about recidivism, right? But for something like this, I mean, think about these allegations. What do you take away from it?
First off, when we're looking at this crime specifically, unfortunately, it does have a high rate of recidivism, meaning there's a high rate of these types of offenders returning to the criminal justice system, unlike a lot of other crimes where we see recidivism rates drop after the age of 25. For instance, murder, robbery, a lot of the violent crime seems to diminish as individuals get older. The biggest problem with this offense is that we have an individual that we know supervision didn't work. We know incarceration didn't work. So for lack of a better term, the United States, the U.S. Attorney's Office rather, is going to attempt to launch him into space. I mean, that is what it's going to happen. He's going to see a sentence being offered him as far as a plea agreement that is going to be lengthy in nature. It comes with a 15-year mandatory minimum, for instance, and that's just a start. And on the federal side, he's not First Step Act eligible, meaning under Donald Trump, when they passed this act, certain offenders could get out of jail a little bit early. But historically, in federal prison, you serve well over 85 to 90% of your time. So this individual is not going to be released anytime soon if he's found guilty and sentenced.
Jeremy Eldridge, my gosh, a lot to talk about. Thank you so much for taking the time. Love your expertise. Love you coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.